Before we dive into the actual rigging walkthrough, we need to talk about a concept called local rigging. Now, I don't think everybody calls it local rigging, but that's what I was taught in college, so that's what I always refer to it as. If you hear me refer to local rigging or a local rig, what I'm talking about is a rig on a live blend shape. So if I were to duplicate this head once, drag it up here, and then create a blend shape by going create deformers, blend shape, just leave default for now, and leave it at 100% at 1. That means that anything that happens to this geometry up here happens in real time to our global rig, our global geometry, which is our main rig. So with this guy isolated in space up here, you can add joints or any types of deformers you want and manipulate them in real time by using the connection editor or the expression editor or any other type of connection method to connect them into actual controls on your global rig or anywhere else that you could add controls. So in short, global rig is your main rig, and a local rig is an isolated, localized rig that's plugged in through various methods. And if we look at the included Kayla hierarchy sheet, you'll see that she has 2 local rigs. There's the rig for her miscellaneous local head joints and her local eye rig. And these are both connected through head-base blend shape into your base head geometry. So whenever you're manipulating Kayla's global head rig, you're also manipulating, at least when you're accessing like eye controls and cheek controls and stuff like that, these 2 local rigs in real time, although they are hidden in the final rig. Now you can use more than one local rig. In Kayla, you'll notice under the hood that there are way more than 2 local rigs, and that's because when creating Kayla, I went through a whole bunch of trial and error, and there's a whole bunch of leftover local rigs that I didn't end up using and stuff like that. We are also probably going to separate out her mouth. You do not need to. You can create her local mouth rig, and by mouth rig, I really mean her lip rig for individual lip tweakers. I'm probably going to separate that out into a 3rd local rig, mostly for the sake of being able to skin it without having many issues and without having to balance it between a whole bunch of other joints. And painting the lips can get pretty tricky, at least in the way that I do it, so I like to have it as simple as possible when I'm going in to paint those lip weights. Of course, with every local rig you make, you have one whole extra skin node that Maya needs to be calculating in real time. I've personally never had an issue where there was serious frame rate drops from each local rig that I add, but if you're using really high-res geometry, maybe the head isn't isolated and you have to deal with the whole body with each blend shape rig or with each local rig, then that might cause a significant frame rate dip, but it's really a case-by-case basis. And again, personally, I've never really had a huge issue with local rigs taking too much out of the frame rate. So while we have this up, we're going to go through and look at what Kayla's base head joints actually require. So now that we understand local and global rigging, we're going to go in and set up Kayla's global rig right now for her head. And as you can see down here, that includes, at the base of the hierarchy, her neck and whatever twist joints or clavicles or other types of upper chest area joints that you need on a per project basis. We're going to skip those since we're just dealing with the facial rig for now. You could always go in and add those after if you were rigging the body. So at the base you've got neck and everything else, then the head top, the head bottom, and beneath head top you have eye sockets, and beneath head bottom you have jaw. So let's move this out of the way for now. And if we switch on over to Kayla's full rig just to demonstrate what these different controls are going to actually do, each of these corresponds to a global joint. So here's her neck control. Connected to the neck in the hierarchy is the head. And beneath the head, you have head top, which is everything from the eyes up. You can translate, rotate, scale, all of these. And head bottom, same thing. And the jaw is housed under head bottom. So the jaw will always follow head bottom. And the sockets are under head top. So you rotate head top, and you can also rotate or translate or scale the whole socket eye area that is housed underneath. That's personally all I choose to include in a global head rig. I separate pretty much everything else out into a local rig. Now the reason I do this is because there are areas of her face, particularly in the nose and the ears, that if I were to include joints for it on the global head rig, I wouldn't be able to get the nice deformation, say, on the bottom of the nose where I have the weight painting trail up into the nose of head bottom to get that really nice kind of muzzle deformation that goes on there. If we were to separate the nose into its own joints, it would still have to be 100% weighted to these joints right here. Because if it wasn't, then when you drag the nose around, it would get parts left over. But if you 100% weighted them in the way that the nose controls would require or desire, then rotating this head bottom control would leave the nose completely put, and you wouldn't get this nice deformation here. Of course, this is just the way I choose to set it up. There are plenty of people who will just put a whole lot of extra joints on their base or global head rig and just deal with getting the nose to maybe move down a little bit with this control or something like that. But this is the way I personally choose to do it. It allows a lot more flexibility. And you could probably get away with leaving the ear on the global rig. Like with head bottom, it doesn't affect it at all, and head top only affects it a teeny tiny bit. I ended up separating it out anyway just because there's that little bit of extra ear wiggle that you get with head top, but it's a per character thing and you could always choose to go against that. So let's go back over to our head geometry and we're going to start placing some joints. So I'm going to place most of these from the side view. You don't have to, it's just my preference. Make sure X-ray joints is turned on right here. And then just go to your joint tool. And let's start by, I'm just going to skip the neck joint since we're not going to be dealing with that with the facial rig. I'm just going to place her head joint to start. And it'll all depend on the character. I'm probably going to place it somewhere around, let's see, maybe right here. You could always move these pivots later on after you've skinned it. So I'll call this head BND for bind. That's just my naming conventions. You're free to use your own. Then I'll duplicate this joint. This is going to be head bottom. Now, head bottom and head top should probably be right on top of each other. So first I'll duplicate that off and move it a little bit up before I actually place these. Oops. Alright, so you're going to want these to be pretty much right in the middle of the head from the side, but you're also going to want it to be in a position so that when you rotate head bottom, the whole jaw area rotates nicely from a pivot that makes sense. So horizontally, it's going to land close to the middle, but maybe just a little bit forward so you can get a nice rotation for this jaw. If you have the Kayla rig, you could always open that up to check the actual position I ended up grabbing for it. So yeah, maybe a little bit further up. Alright, let's just go with that for now. You can always change it later again. Now, vertically, you're going to want head top to definitely land below the bottom line of the eye because you're going to be rotating everything from that area up. So I'm going to just put it right below the lower lid area right there. And head bottom, you might even end up putting a little bit above it, but you're going to want it to land probably around halfway up the nose, maybe just slightly higher, slightly lower. Because if it was, say, too low, then when you paint the little bit of influence through the nose and rotate it, the nose is going to start counter-rotating in the opposite direction because the pivot is below it. So I think those are good positions for now. For a head top, it probably wouldn't hurt to actually center it a little bit more. This isn't a control that's used all that often, but it if you wanted to get really picky about it, rotating from the center of the head sideways would probably be a good idea. But for now, I'm actually just going to leave it right there. Let's duplicate this again. This is going to be jaw. Now, for stylized characters, I'd suggest having your jaw a little bit farther back and a little bit higher up than a realistic jaw, just so it gives it a bit more of a range of motion. And even looks like it might be translating a little bit if it's farther back a little bit. Just play around with it depending on the character. So realistically, her draw rotation would probably be right around here. I'll pull it back just a little bit and go a little bit higher up so that I can maybe add a tiny bit of nose influence in there. Maybe just a little less. Let's go with right there for now. You know what? I am going to raise it a little bit more. Okay, that's good. Duplicate this again. This is going to be the left socket. Let's go back over to perspective for a minute while we position the socket joint. You're going to want the socket joint to share the exact pivot of your eye joint that you're using. We don't have that set up right now, so we'll just use the eye geometry. So if you just select your eye geometry, and then in the outliner it would be Control Select to add another one for the socket, and then just do a quick point constraint. That would be a constrain point. I have a shortcut for it right here. And make sure maintain offset is not on, so that will yank the position over, and then just delete that constraint. So now it's in the right position. It shares the exact pivot of the eye. We're going to hold off on mirroring the socket joint over just yet. We'll get to that a little bit later. For now, the next step we need to do is to add some controls and nulls to each of these joints. The way I do it is I do above the joint a control, above that a locator, and above that a group. You can do one group, two groups, one locator, two locators, or the mixture that I do. I like to do control locator group just so it's easy to distinguish which is which. But the locator and the group serve the same purpose, which is just to give an extra level of control for the rigger so that you can make adjustments later on. It also gives you multiple levels to be able to key with set-driven key or expressions or anything like that if you need to add any automated features later on. So let's start out with adding a control. I'll just go create NURBS primitives circle and freeze transformations, delete history. Now let's start by creating the head control. So I'll grab head, control click in the outliner, the NURBS circle. I'll run a script that I have that just creates a point constraint and deletes it to yank it over there. And now let's hit 4 to enter wireframe. And after freezing these transformations again, let's start to adjust the shape of this. Just enter component mode with F8 is what I did. Or you could right click and do control vertice or control vertex. And I'm just going to position it above the head so it's easy to access. You can put this wherever you want though. And since we were just editing the vertices, the actual pivot didn't change. So I'm going to freeze transformations and delete history again, just to make sure everything's clean. Let's name this head con for control. Then I'm also going to create a locator, snap it to the same place. Name this head lope. And then I am also going to create a group. I'll do it with nothing selected just so I can easily snap it to the same location without it moving anything beneath it. It's going to be head GRP. And snap once again. Okay. So now we have 3 guys with the same position and orientation, which is 0 since we didn't rotate them at all. And then we're just going to connect them into a hierarchy. So connect the head joint to the control to the locator, and the locator to the group. So now we have our joint and the control that the animator will use, followed by a locator for any changes we need to make, and an extra group for the same reason. Now, the last thing I'll do is definitely freeze transformations on the actual control so that the values start at 0 for the animator. Since it's underneath an object that has the same orientation of it, even if these values were different, the control would stay in the same place because it's zeroing it out to its parent's values, but visible at 0. So the locator will retain all of this orientation that we may have set up if this was an oriented control. Now, I actually have a script that I personally use. It's an old script, so I'm not going to really share it. I need to really update it if I put it online. But what it essentially does is everything we just did. You just select a joint or multiple joints that are children of the world, and it will go ahead and match a control locator and group above it and connect it in a hierarchy. So I'm just going to select all the rest of these, hit my control locator group command, and it went ahead and did that for all of these and renamed them as well. And now the only thing we need to do is manually connect all of these together. So let's connect head bottom and head top to the head joint. Jaw to head bottom. And remember, it's the highest level of the groups that you have connected to the joint, which is the lowest of the parent. So now we're just going to do a socket to head top. Now, one thing that I actually want to do is use the mirror joint option to get a nice parallel or mirrored control for the socket. So I'm actually going to temporarily duplicate the socket and unparent it. And I am also going to duplicate head top and unparent it. And then just delete all that. The reason I did that is because to use the mirror joints tool, you need to have a true joint parent here. So I'll parent those together. You'll see that bone connecting them. And then I will use mirror joints. Normally that would be under skeleton mirror joint. We're going to make sure it's over XY, so it mirrors to the opposite of X. Behavior is fine. We can tell it to search for L and replace with R, but you don't have to. Then I'll hit apply, and that did not work. I think we actually need a YZ. So it's mirroring across the actual ZY plane. Let's try that. There we go. Alright. So let's just unparent that and delete these guys. Get rid of that one. Run the script again and connect that under head top. There we go. So now we have our whole hierarchy set up. Real quick, let's actually hide this group so we can, or let's not hide it, let's actually just go into wireframe mode, and we're going to go through and select all of these guys and position them however we want in component mode. So we're definitely going to want to pull out these guys, switch to world mode so they don't mirror. Scale these up. Try to mirror that over here. Good enough. They don't have to be perfect since we're not actually affecting the pivots now. Now, how about jaw? A trick is if you control right click with at least one CV selected, you can go to 2 CVs and it'll select that whole ring there. So this one I believe is jaw. I'll place it right below the chin. Quick trick, if you control click any of these axes, the middle overall drag control for it will lock that axis, so I can go like this and it won't affect the X at all. Alright, if you control click the middle, it'll fix that. Now head top. If you hold in J and rotate any of the individual axes, it'll snap in increments, so I can make sure I can easily rotate it to 90 degrees. And now the last one is head bottom. Alright, that's good for now. So there we have our whole hierarchy set up. I'm actually going to lower the head control just a little bit real quick. Alright, okay, good. So as long as everything here is set up correctly, we're ready to start actually painting weights on these and skinning them. So if I select each of these joints, make sure it's the actual joint, not the control. And then select the geometry. Normally you'd go to skin, bind skin, smooth bind options. We're pretty much gonna reduce all the influence to one joint to start out with, so these settings don't really matter too much. I'll just leave it on selected joints, closest distance, linear, interactive, distance is fine. And this is the stuff that really doesn't matter. Get rid of maintain max influences so we can do it how we want. And I personally like to get rid of colorized skeleton. I think it's kind of just buggy and unnecessary, but you can leave that on if you want. And bind skin. So it's going to give us something kind of nasty by default, but we're going to go in and fix this up ourselves. So with the geometry selected, if you go to skin, edit smooth skin, paint skin weights tool, I've created a shortcut for it right here. We're going to go in, select head with everything else unlocked, and flood everything with replace, brush doesn't matter, 100, 100, or well, 1, 1, and flood. And now we're going to start stealing weights from the parents in a sequential way, and you'll see what I mean soon. So the first thing we're going to do is paint head top and head bottom. I'll just start with head bottom for the heck of it. So I will lock everything except for head and head bottom. So I'm going to go into component mode, lasso tool. We're going to always be mirroring our weights across the axis, by the way, so no need to worry about how it looks as far as being even on both sides. And to start head bottom, I'll go into the right view, and head bottom is not going to include the neck area. So we're going to make sure we're really just grabbing the jaw area and up into the lower part of the nose. So I'll just cut straight across here, avoiding the ear, and then cut kind of straight across here and just barely nick the nose at the bottom. Back to perspective. Now, the reason I would suggest not using the right-click Paint Skin Weights tool button and instead using the one that I created from the menu, or just clicking it in the menu, is that if you select some verts and then do the right-click one, it deselects them for some reason, which is really dumb. But if you use the menu version, it stays selected, and that means that everything we paint will only affect this area. So I can just do a 100% flood into head bottom, and it'll just affect these vertices. Then I'll get rid of that selection and go back just to smooth them out. Let's see how that worked out. Not too bad. Let's go in and polish it a little bit. Smooth this area out. Again, we're just going to worry about the left side and then mirror it over. Alright. Definitely too much nose. So since everything is locked besides head and head bottom, if I paint a value of 0 while head bottom is selected, that's always going to be shooting a positive value back to head and vice versa. So you could select head and paint positive to get rid of some of this nose, or paint negative on head bottom. It doesn't matter as long as you just have these two unlocked. If you have more than two unlocked, then it's not going to know where to shoot to, and you might end up with a less than desirable effect. So I'll do replace soft brush value of 0 and a low opacity, and then start just adding in some 0 to head bottom across the nose. And since it's low opacity, we can do it in a bunch of individual clicks. Alright. Zero this out. I have a shortcut mapped to a script that zeroes out. Normally you just enter 0 over here for rotation, translate, 1 for scale. Go back to paint, smooth it out, and then I'm just going to mirror this over. I have a shortcut for it. I believe it is under skin, edit smooth skin, mirror skin weights. Y to Z is what you want, positive to negative. You can mess around with different options here. I'll just leave them set to this. Let's check this out. Alright, still way too much. It's starting to look pretty good. Can leave it at that for now, although I will actually fix just this area right here, which is getting dragged down a bit too much. Whoops. Zero it out to mirror. Alright, that's looking pretty good for now. We're not going to spend too much time finessing in this tutorial series, just because you can always check back with Kayla's final rig. And this is the result I ended up getting. It's a lot less than what we currently have, but we'll just stick with it for now. So now that we have head bottom looking exactly how we want, we can lock that, unlock head top, and now we're safe to paint head top as much as we want without it stealing any positive influence from head bottom. So we're just stealing from, again, head. So head top's a little more simple than head bottom. We're going to want to pretty much just cut straight across right below where the eye ends, and then avoid the ear as well, and then cut around the back of the skull. So let's just cut straight across the nose bridge and kind of go under there a little bit. I won't worry about nicking the ear right now because we can't really avoid that at the moment. I'll get rid of the selection afterwards. Alright, that's looking good. Actually should have turned on reflection so we could make sure when we deselect the ear it does it on both sides, but when we mirror the weights it'll get rid of that anyway, so I'll just worry about getting rid of them over here for now. I'm just holding control and dragging boxes to deselect the ear. Alright. Let's see how this looks if we flood it. And then smooth it. I'm actually going to temporarily parent the eye geometry to the sockets just so it doesn't distract us. Alright, that's actually looking pretty good. Yeah, I think that's good enough. We'll just leave that like this for now. Just make sure you mirror it over. Alright, good. Let's see what we have next. Alright, we'll leave a jaw for last because that's the most complicated one. So lock head top, unlock left socket. Right socket will automatically be mirrored, so we don't have to worry about painting that. So the socket is going to cover all of the eyelids and then a little bit extra around that. So the easiest way to do that, as long as your eyes were modeled in clean edge rings, we can select vert, double click one next to it to grab this whole ring, and then we'll just hit Shift period a few times on the keyboard to grow that selection. Looks like I messed up just a tiny bit, so we'll just go in and get rid of these. Alright. I think that should probably be good. We might want to add just one more in there. And then we might have to clean up by getting rid of some eyebrow influence afterwards, but let's see how this works out. Just going to flood 100% to that, and it's just going to steal from head, because everything else is locked. And you know what? I'll actually smooth this with the same selection so that it doesn't smooth it outside of this line, and then we won't have to worry about the brow. Oh, my bad. Actually, we are not going to be stealing from head because we're stealing from head top since we already painted that. So lock head, unlock head top, flood, and smooth. Let's see how that worked. Great. It's a little sharp, so we're going to want to smooth that out a little bit. In fact, I might just select this specific ring to smooth. Let's actually turn on a wireframe. Yep, that's what we want. It's still a little stiff of a fall off, so you might want to go in and grab this next loop, although it isn't exactly a loop, so we'll have to do a few extra clicks. Definitely deselect the brow area though. We don't want the brow moving with this control. And then just smooth that a few times. Alright, much better. Now just mirror that over. Good. So the last thing we have to paint is the jaw. And that's going to be stealing from its parent, which is head bottom. So lock everything except for head bottom and jaw. Jaw is definitely the one that takes the longest and is the most difficult. We're not going to finesse it quite to the point that the finished rig would have, just because that would take a very long time. But you can always hop over, if you have the Kayla rig included, and check out what the skinning ended up looking like. I do not believe there are any correctives firing off with this shape, at least not significantly. The only thing to note is that this joint is automatically scaling horizontally to contain some volume, just a little bit. So let's go back and start painting. For the jaw, I'm going to want to see it going up and down, so I'll create some keys for now. I'll leave it at 0 on frame 1, so we can always go back there to mirror. And then whatever other frame you want further down, let's just open it up in the X. It's probably good enough. And now we'll probably start painting with it just open a tiny bit. Go to the side. Let's grab the general area, probably avoiding the actual lips just because grabbing some extra top area isn't something we want right now. So let's just grab this whole area. Don't be afraid to go past it into this area because since head is locked, we won't be able to steal anything from it. So with all that selected, we're just gonna flood this, and then if you exit the tool and come back into it, you'll see that it did not steal from the areas that were locked on other joints. So I'm not gonna go ahead and smooth this quite yet. Well, maybe like once for now, or twice. All right, go into perspective, see how that's looking. All right. And remember, it was really important to make sure the under jaw line here that opens and closes is exactly how we want it when we go into paint head bottom, because we're going to be balancing the two. I guess it doesn't matter too much because now that jaw bottom is covering the majority of that, you could always just paint between jaw and head to fix this area. Or in the case of if this was a full rig, you'd be bouncing between jaw and some of the neck joints. So let's just start manually painting in some of this area here. Or let's start with one actually. So let's start by grabbing these. Definitely the middle area. Be careful that you don't do too much in one swipe, because each time you let go of the mouse, that's what you'll be able to undo when you hit undo. Alright, let's see what happens if I smooth this a little bit now. Alright, looking good. Start adding some influence here, although I'll switch to a softer brush. Oh, that was smooth, we want replace. What the shape of the open mouth should be will always depend on the character and, more importantly, on the art direction, the design. But you could also look in a mirror for some good reference for what a mouth should look like when it's open. Alright, it's pulling the corner down a little too much. So let's paint some negative on the corner, or positive if you had head bottom selected. I think the trick to making a stylized character's mouth corner appealing is to make it keep really sharp points, which is difficult. So keep that in mind as you're painting it. For now, we're just trying to kind of get it to lie halfway between the top and the bottom. Just so that this isn't as distracting, let's go back to frame 1 and mirror. Alright. Definitely going to want to add 100% to the bottom middle row. Make sure you have the inside of the mouth painted nicely as well, which isn't difficult. For now, we'll just focus on the lips, but if we need to polish it up inside the mouth later, we can do that. This is definitely pulling too much here, so let's kick that back up. Right now I'm just holding control to paint 0 instead of 1. Smooth this a little bit. Whoa. Towards the corner, definitely have it start to taper off here to create that nice point. You're going to want a tiny bit of influence on the upper lip towards the middle, but not a significant amount. Alright, it's looking pretty good, so now we're going to focus on tightening up these corners. So very light opacity for that. Keep in mind which ring is the actual middle line. In our case, it is this ring right here. So keep that one straight, but have everything else taper towards down towards it. Let me smooth a little bit around it now. Alright, let's check this out mirrored. Alright, not bad. We're gonna call that okay for now. If you need to again see the finished polished version, just hop over to Kayla. see how this looks if it were to scale in a little bit. Alright, it's looking pretty good. You might want to adjust the pivot if you're not enjoying how this looks. I think it might be rotating a little bit too far back. We might want it to look a little more translated so there's more room for a open mouth. Of course, translation is also unlocked with the controls, so you could always just leave it in the animator's hands. But I think I will actually move the pivot of this. Now make sure you move the pivot of the actual control, you don't have to worry about the joint or the groups for now. So just hit insert, move this a little bit farther back, slightly up, hit insert again. Alright, that's looking better. So that plus scale would be what it would look like. Cool. So unless we missed something, I believe that is everything you need to add for her global head rig. You can add a few other things. For Kayla, added a chin control. You can see right here. Just parented that under the jaw. And on her global rig, you can also do stuff with like the hair, the glasses, all that's on her global rig in the Kayla rig. Okay, so that is it for her global rig. In the next lesson, we're going to dive into setting up her first local rig.